Hello, welcome to Things That Go Bump in the Night, a paranormal podcast exploring the weird, the unusual, the dark and mysterious in northern Ohio and beyond. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Dan. Buckle in, get ready, grab something to drink. The story is about to begin. Hello, welcome to Things That Go Bump in the Night, episode number 1. In this series, we will visit, discuss, and explore different paranormal, dark, and mysterious places in northern Ohio and beyond. In this episode, we're going to discuss an urban legend. This one is popular in northern Ohio, and it is the legend of Gore Orphanage. Now, if you grew up in the northern Ohio area, there's probably a good chance you've heard of, or maybe you've even visited, Gore Orphanage. That is, if you're brave enough. The legend has existed for a long time. Longer than most people have been alive. In this episode, we're going to discuss the legends, the rumors, the myths, some experiences. Let's start with discussing the truth. The truth of the matter starts with one guy by the name of Joseph Swift. He was born in Williamstown, Massachusetts in 1794. He attended Williams College. He was a man of means and decided to seek his fortune by traveling west to the untamed wilderness that was Vermilion, Ohio. Joseph was a war veteran of 1812. He was born in Massachusetts. And a result of his participation in the war, he was given a plot of land in northern Ohio. Now, he was also able to convince his brother and sister to purchase land as well, but all records indicate that he was probably the only one who made the trip. And it was a long trip. It took Joseph Swift over 9 weeks to walk from Massachusetts to northern Ohio with little more than an ox and an axe and no cart to carry his provisions. It was just him on foot. Now, Joseph Swift was a hard worker, and he set about clearing by hand over 400 acres of heavily wooded land. It took him 20 years to do this. While he was clearing the land, Joseph Swift made money by producing what was known as potash. The way potash was made was by cutting down a tree, burning it, taking the resulting ashes, boiling it down, distilling it into a concentrated ash form. And this is how potash was produced. Potash was going for over $100 a bushel at the time, and Joseph Swift figured out a way to sell this at the open market. In 1840, he began construction on an opulent mansion for his family. It was a Greek revival style mansion, and he sourced materials from all over the world. The land that he built his mansion on and the farmland was known as Little Egypt. It was known as Little Egypt because about once a year the land would flood, depositing a fertile coat of topsoil, allowing many crops to grow. The mansion that Joseph Swift built was beautiful and really stood out at the time. People came from all over the world to see this architectural marvel. It had 14-foot ceilings, elaborate woodwork, and even an attached servants' quarters. The Swifts would also build a barn between the mansion and the river. All that's left today are the remains of the foundation of the Swift mansion itself. Mrs. Swift planted gorgeous rose gardens all around the beautiful mansion, and the house became known as Rosedale. However, not all of the neighbors were smitten by it all, and some derisively began to call it Swift's folly, probably behind his back. Times got tough. and Joseph Swift had invested some money in railroad stock. While the railroad was the future of transportation in America, however, at the time, many smaller railroads went belly up. Therefore, it was a bad investment, and Joseph Swift lost it all. The family was forced to sell their beloved Rosedale, and the family fortune was lost. It should be noted that the Swift family did lose 2 family members while they were there. So here's where the story kind of gets a little strange. The Swifts were forced to sell their beloved Rosedale to the Nicholas Wilbur and the Wilbur family. They were said to be known as spiritualists, which didn't really sit too well with the rest of the farming community. Nicholas Wilbur bought the land in 1874, so he bought the mansion and the entire plot of the farmland, the over 400 acres that took Joseph Swift so long to clear. In short order, people began to wonder and scratch their head about the Wilbur family. And I think it's fair to say Mrs. Wilbur was something of an odd bird herself. She was known to host parties with unusual rituals and seances. Not too many people understood what that all entailed at the time. And then tragedy struck. In 1893, in a week span, between January 13th and the 19th, the Wilbur family were to lose 4 of their grandchildren. Jesse, Ruby, Roy, and May all passed from a diphtheria epidemic. The newspaper reported that they had passed away at their parents who were living in Berlin Heights. There is still conjecture to this day that they didn't, that they passed at the mansion and are buried close by. Either way, it was said that Mrs. Wilbur continued to set the table for her missing grandchildren, and when they were finished with dinner, she would take them outside and put them on what they said were graves. If you want to know more about the Wilburs, there is an excellent podcast in Ohio folklore entitled Gore Orphanage. The author Melissa does a fantastic job and is very well researched. And if you're a fan of Gore Orphanage at all, go check it out. It's definitely worth it. After that devastating tragedy, the Wilburs move out. The Wilburs buried their family close by at Chestnut Grove Cemetery on the outskirts of Vermilion, just a short drive from the Swift mansion. The family was devastated and soon left Rosedale. This takes us to our third act in this play. And this one, our protagonist is Reverend John Sprunger. If you thought the Wilburs were unusual, well, this is about to get really strange. So Reverend John Sprunger and his wife had run an orphanage in Indiana, which also burned down, and I don't remember if it was mysterious circumstances, but it was just unusual that it burned down at all. So they bought the land and moved in. The Sprungers would open an orphanage on the site. Using the farms as a source of revenue and self-sustaining, the orphanage was known as Light of Hope. Now, here's where the story kind of takes a weird little turn. When the Sprungers purchased the farmland, it had also included a couple of farmhouses. These would be used for the boys' and girls' respective dormitories. At its maximum capacity, it had 120 people. Also, not everybody in the house were orphans. Some had merely been dropped off by their parents because they didn't really want to deal with them. So it was kind of an unusual mix of the children, some orphans, some not. Either way, they said that the labor was hard and the working conditions were even harder. It was known that the children were farmed out as labor to area farmers, as well as working very hard on their own self-sustaining farm. It was rumored that the kids would try to escape in the night. They would have to walk the river in the cover of darkness over 5 miles. Even to this day, the river valley remains very dark and very foreboding. Eventually, the authorities had heard stories and rumors about the Sprungers and their mistreatment of the children. They did conduct an investigation, and the results were absolutely devastating for their orphanage. In short order, Reverend John Sprunger had passed away. His wife and family continued to try to keep the orphanage open, but they simply could not. The orphanage closed in 1916 and the buildings were abandoned. This orphanage opened in 1903. It was said to house at its maximum capacity 120 people, and it closed in 1916. After the orphanage closed, Swift Mansion was left open to the elements and virtually unguarded. Vagrants soon moved in, vandals, and pretty soon the mansion fell into disrepair. In 1923, a fire started under mysterious circumstances. Nobody's really sure how it started, and all kinds of weird theories and conjecture began to appear. After that, the land changes hands several times and is now part of the Lorain County Metro Parks. You can visit the remains of the Swift Mansion today. But beware, it is part of the Lorain County Metro Parks property, and you must abide by the park's rules. There is also a park ranger who lives just up the hill, who has very good hearing and is not afraid to help escort you off the property at night. Now that we've covered the truth, let's talk about some of the legends and the rumors that surround Gore Orphanage. But a couple notes. Number one, these rumors have changed and evolved over time. There were rumors that the Swift Mansion was haunted stretching back to 1923. A photograph exists of the mansion and it entitled Haunted House. It was thought this might have been one of the last pictures taken ever before the mansion burned down. So the legend usually goes something like this. There was an old man named Gore. This man was not particularly fond of children and, through some set of circumstances, was in charge of an orphanage. He rounded up the kids, locked the doors, set fire to the orphanage, burning to death all 100 children inside, while he got away off into the night. So the next part of the rumor is that the kids are buried along the riverbank, the kids that passed away in the fire, and their graves glow at midnight if you visit it. As well, you can also hear the anguished cries of the children as they perish in the fire. Sometimes this is attributed to the road noise from a highway that passes over the river valley not far from Gore Orphanage. That part is true. There is an overpass, and it's frequented by heavy trucks and cars, but it's pretty easy to distinguish the sound of cars from the anguished cries of children burning for all eternity. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Old Man Gore in this story, but I've also heard or read on the internet, and I believe everything on the internet, of course, was that it was a disgruntled employee, and it was not Old Man Gore. In fact, Old Man Gore was beloved by all. And in this circumstance, it was the disgruntled employee, usually a male, who set fire to the building and inadvertently also killed Old Man Gore. Okay, the next rumor that is surrounding Gore Orphanage in my official list of rumors and legends is that you can see the ghostly orphans running and playing in the trees. Now, this one is a little different. Some people have claimed if they take enough pictures of the trees, you can start to see the orphans pop their head out from behind the trees. There are plenty of pictures on the internet to validate this claim. I myself have been to Gore Orphanage plenty of times and taken a lot of pictures of a lot of trees, and frankly, I've yet to see any orphans pop their head out from behind any trees, in pictures or in real life. So the next rumor or legend about Gore Orphanage is that the Wilbur family were Satanists. I'm not sure how much validity I place into that because you think there would be some supporting documentation or there would be some evidence surrounding it other than just an internet rumor. While nobody really questions that they were spiritualists, however, Satanists seem to be a little bit of a stretch. Okay, moving on. We have the kids leaving ghostly handprints on your car. The story on this one is that if you park your car at Gore Orphanage, you take a walk and you visit the Swift Mansion, when you come back, there will be ghost handprints, little handprints on your car made by the orphans of the children. Now, there was a park ranger who lived just up the hill in the house, and he would take delight in scaring kids, including leaving handprints that look like little kid handprints on your car. So the next legend is that the graves glow at night on the riverbank of the children. See, now this where could get a little strange, because are they referring to the graves of the children who passed in the non-existent fire, or are they talking about the graves of the Wilbur grandchildren? See, that's where it can get a little strange, but either way, I have yet to hear or see of any graves glowing on the riverbank at midnight or any other time. So another legend that seems to abound is that the kids in period clothes will appear before you, and then as you approach them, they disappear into the woods. I think we can kind of tie that into the kids playing behind the trees, so we're going to scratch that one off our list. Okay, so the next legend or rumor, I suppose, is that Mrs. Swift herself started the fire because she was seen riding horseback in the cover of darkness, getting away because she was so grief-stricken after having lost her beloved Rosedale. She decided to start the fire herself. Okay, so those are some internet rumors. Now I want to touch base on a couple of rumors and experiences that I've had, and to kind of somewhat validate these things. And I'll start off with some interactions I've had, conversations I've had with a couple of people within the paranormal community. The first conversation I have was with a psychic who offers tours of Cleveland. We'll leave it at that. I was having a conversation with this psychic, and the topic of Gore Orphanage came up. She insisted to be very knowledgeable, and in short order, we proceeded to go down to Gore Orphanage. Now, she insisted the Wilbur children did die at Rosedale, and in fact, they're buried there, and they're buried there head down, face first, as an insult to God. As well, she insisted that the whole entire area had a dark, evil energy, and she has had to cleanse several of the area homes. Now, she also went on to say that the bridge which goes over the Vermilion River, which you have to cross to get to the Swift Mansion site, is also haunted. It's haunted by a dark specter, a figure who guards the bridge, and he's not particularly fond of, well, anybody. And that if you upset him on the wrong night, there's a chance he could take his revenge on you. She also talked about a dark energy that surrounded the whole place. And if you go down there, you'd better protect yourself in one way or the other. She can, of course, protect you for a price. The second conversation that I want to share with you is a conversation I had with a leader of a local paranormal research team. And he said that at one time in the 1980s, he was chased out of Gore Orphanage. He proceeded to tell me a story that he went to visit Gore Orphanage in the middle of the night. And the following activities took place around 3 o'clock in the morning. In fact, he was chased out by the police and some Satanists. They chased him out and also shoved a telephone pole in his path to block his exit. He found a way to drive around these and somehow narrowly escaped. So we talked about the truth. We talked about some of the legends and rumors surrounding Gore Orphanage. Well, let's talk about Gore Orphanage and my experiences there. I grew up close to Gore Orphanage, and I've been to Gore Orphanage many, many, many times. For the longest time, I didn't believe a word of it. I thought it was nonsense. It was just a fun rumor to talk about, and it was just a place to go to scare yourself and kind of have fun with your friends. For a long time, Gore Orphanage was kind of a rough place. It was a dead-end road, and the firearms, tobacco, and alcohol lobbies were all well represented because there was very, very little adult supervision. There was a story that the police were afraid to come down there because their radios didn't work, and it was said the police did not want to be confronted by an angry mob of orphans, Satanists, Mrs. Wilbur, or anybody else. So it was always just kind of a weird place to go. Some of the rumors that I had heard were that a boy and a girl took a drive and they parked on Orphanage Road. They decided to take a walk in the beautiful summer weather. Before long, they heard thunder and they made a hasty retreat back to their car. No sooner were they in the car than they heard the drip, drip, drip on the windshield. Assuming it was rain, they looked up, and to their horror, they discovered it was not rain, but it was blood. And the blood was coming from an orphan who was hung from a tree. I'm not sure how many people bleed when they hang, but in this case, that's what happened. There was also stories, of course, that the graves would glow at midnight. That story was alive and well even back then, but let's bring it up to full speed. Let me tell you about some experiences that I've had at Gore Orphanage lately. If you believe in this kind of thing, Gore Orphanage can be a dark place. It is at the end of a dead-end road. And by Gore Orphanage, I mean this where the Swift Mansion is. Some people believe that there is some correlation between the spiritual activity and the Swift Mansion, or they believe it had something to do with the Sprungers. Or some people also believe the Wilburs may have stirred some things up with their seances, their rituals, maybe throwing some Satan activity in there. Either way, Orphanage can be kind of a weird, dark place. So here's my story I have to tell. I decided to take a kayak trip down the Vermilion River, and the Vermilion River runs through the Swift River Valley. The Vermilion River isn't usually high enough to kayak on, but because it had rained recently, it was high enough. It was a good opportunity. So I made plans to go kayaking. Now, there was also a young lady that was going to accompany me, and we're going to call this lady Greta. Greta and I had been talking, and she told me she was psychic and sensitive and deeply involved in the paranormal. In fact, she could instantly sense when there was a disturbance or there was dark energy. At the time, I thought it was 100% nonsense, and she was just blowing smoke for the purposes of this conversation. We'll call her Greta. So Greta and I decided for our first date we would go kayaking on the Vermilion River. Now, Greta had never been kayaking, and we're going to call her maybe a little high-strung. Might be a polite and delicate way to phrase it. So off we go. It was a lot of fun. But I quickly realized we had a problem. I had staged our takeout vehicle much further away than I had intended, and because the river was so low, we were going to struggle to get back to our vehicle before dark. Now that's okay. I've been on the river at dark at night. It's all right. It'll be fine. But now I have to worry about Greta being with me and her being excitable and such. So I called and told my sister to help us get a ride and meet us at Gore Orphanage, and that's where we'll take our kayaks out. So, okay, a plan is hatched. Good. So we paddle along the river. It's a fantastic, beautiful night. Gorgeous, gorgeous summer night. As we paddle along, we pass underneath the Dean's Hollow Bridge. We'll talk about this in another episode, but the Dean's Hollow Bridge has dark history of its own. So as we paddle underneath the bridge, all of a sudden bats descend upon us, eating bugs off the river, but also fluttering around my head. And I remarked to Greta, hey, aren't these bats cool? Look, they're all around. She didn't have her glasses, and she said, oh, I can't see. Are they around me? And I just simply said, oh, no, they're just around me. And I looked over, and there was maybe, 3 dozen bats all flying around Greta's head. We continue paddling, and no sooner did we round a bend than instantly, the mood changed. The mood got dark. It was just weird. As we paddle along, a fog slowly begins to roll along the river, and it just can't get any weirder. And no sooner do I say that than the distinct smell of smoke, in fact, cigarette smoke, which is odd on the river this time at night in summer in the middle of Gore Orphanage with absolutely nobody else around. So Greta began to, in a word, freak out. She said, I'm feeling these waves of dark emotion, this sadness, and she said, I can't breathe. You have to come and help me. So I didn't know if this was an episode or exactly what psychic energy was overcoming her, but I began to paddle to assist her. I look over to my right. As I look over, I see a dark figure, a silhouette, moving along the riverbank, but at the same pace that I was paddling at. The figure didn't have a cadence. It wasn't bobbing up and down like a person running or walking would have. It glided through the fog, and I remember thinking, wow, that's odd how that dark figure is moving through that fog. But meanwhile, I have to go over and tend to Greta. In all honesty, it was like a scene from a Twilight Zone episode. Paddling along, Greta freaking out, fog rolling in, Shadow Man on my right, and I knew I had to, get out of there. So, for some reason, the current became really, really curiously strong, suspiciously strong, and my intention was to push our kayaks over to the base of the bridge, the footing of the bridge, the one closest to the road, so away from Gore Orphanage. I thought I had remembered there was a little inlet there. It was pitch dark. I couldn't see a thing. We couldn't. So we had to float underneath the very dark and very shady bridge. So we go to the other side. It's even worse there. So we had to go back to the original spot. So we paddle, and the current was really, really, for some reason, really crazy strong. So we make it to the other side where we originally had tried to throw our kayaks in. So she was having a hard time, with her freaking out and all. So I was able to hop out of my kayak, throw it on shore, go to assist her. Now she was able to stand up in the kayak, or at least kind of scoot her legs forward to the point where she was trying to stand up. And I said, come on, let's go. And I offered my hand for assistance, and she said, I can't. Someone has grabbed my ankle and won't let go. So we became locked in this tug of war. I was pulling her out, and she was trying to pull her leg out, and she was freaking out, and she said something has grabbed onto my ankle. So with one giant heave, I kind of pulled her, and we both kind of landed up on the shore like a couple of dead carp, and that was it. So in short order, my sister had thankfully arrived, gave us a ride out of there, and it was the weirdest experience I've had at Gore Orphanage. Wow, fantastic. I'm so glad you made it to the end. Thank you so much for listening. This is my first podcast. I really learned a lot, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and it taught me a lot of things. And one thing I recognize is that I'm out of time. So I have more experiences to share, as well as some places around Gore Orphanage that are really, really, really creepy and weird too. Like the Peasley Road Monster. We'll talk about Dean's Hollow. And there's a couple other local spots I'd like to share with you. So thank you so much for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode. Bye.